PlayStation VR has been out for almost 3 years, and in that time has sold approximately 4.2 million units around the world. And we can expect those numbers to continue growing as more and more players begin to adopt the platform and more developers continue to churn out great games. But with all of that being said, one pressing question still remains. Is PlayStation VR worth it? Now, first things first, if you're considering a PlayStation VR headset, odds are you either own a PS4 or a PS4 Pro system. And the attitude you have going into PlayStation VR is going to dictate the experiences you're going to take away from it. Allow me to explain. If you go into PlayStation VR expecting it to be the ultimate replacement to the casual way of playing games, sitting on a couch or chair in front of a TV, you're going to be sorely disappointed. PlayStation VR is not meant to replace the traditional way of playing video games. It's not advertised as such, and you shouldn't expect it to. The mindset that I have when it came to approaching PlayStation VR was similar to that of the analog stick. When it arrived on the market many years ago, it wasn't meant to replace the D-pad completely, but simply offer a more immersive and optional way to play compatible video games. But when talking about PlayStation VR, we can't talk about it without mentioning the available bundles for the platform. And my particular bundle, while it is a little older, came with Doom VFR, but it has since been replaced by a newer updated version that comes with Demo Disc 2.0, Moss, and Astrobot Rescue Mission as the baseline models. In North America, there are 2 more expensive bundles that come with a set of Move controllers that include Borderlands 2 VR and Beat Saber as the 2 pack-in games, while the other bundle includes Creed Rise to Glory and Superhot VR as its 2 pack-in games, along with Demo Disc 2.0. Now, right off the bat, when you select a PSVR bundle and bring it home and unbox everything, you're going to notice that this isn't exactly the most simple or seamless setup. There are a bunch of cables running from the PS4 to the processing unit to the TV and then to your wall. Fortunately, most of those can be tucked away behind your cabinet or desk and never looked at again once you set it up. The main cable you have to worry about is the one that runs from the PSVR unit to the front of the processing unit. So we've talked about the available bundles and setting up the PlayStation VR unit, but let's talk about the peripherals, the things that you're going to use to interact with your games. Most of the games will either have you use a DualShock 4, a set of Move controllers, or my personal favorite controller out of all of them is the AIM controller. Playing with a regular DualShock 4 is pretty much what you'd expect it to be, if you're familiar with the DualShock 4. The only thing that really changes from playing on a traditional TV to the PlayStation VR is the usage of the right analog stick. In most games, in the traditional sense, you use the right stick to move your camera or viewfinder around, but in PlayStation VR, you use your head and just look around and the PlayStation camera will respond and adjust your viewpoint accordingly. Playing with the Move controllers, on the other hand, requires more of a learning curve because these things weren't exactly built for PSVR and instead were retrofitted to work with the platform. You will notice right off the bat that there is a steep learning curve because these Move controllers lack 2 sets of triggers, analog sticks, the clickable portions of the analog sticks, and a directional pad. Instead, you mainly have 1 trigger on each controller, 4 PlayStation buttons, a PlayStation Move button, and that's pretty much it. While they work decent depending on the game you're playing, if you're looking for fluidity, you're going to be sorely disappointed, as most games simply have you teleporting around or using the PlayStation face buttons in the form of a broken directional pad. It's not terrible, mind you, but it's not even as fluid as a directional pad and is far worse than using an analog stick. But for what they are, they work pretty well. My favorite controller when playing first-person shooters is the PlayStation AIM controller. This controller doesn't have as steep of a learning curve as, say, the Move controllers, but they instead has all of the DualShock 4's buttons present on the controller itself. They're just repositioned to fit the ergonomics of the controller. The sticks that you're used to are here for fluid movement, a trigger for firing, and so many more buttons you'll need to play through your favorite first-person shooter games are all present on this AIM controller. And it's so much more fun to play first-person shooters using this thing than a regular DualShock 4 because it once again falls back on that whole immersion thing. So, we've talked about the systems, the bundles, and the compatible peripherals, but let's talk about the most important factor when it comes to any console or console accessory, and that is software. After all, without great software, any piece of hardware is dead on arrival. Fortunately for PlayStation VR, this isn't the case. There is an amazing selection of games across a wide variety of genres from developers around the world. If you're looking for first-person shooters, there's the online-focused Firewall Zero Hour, Doom VFR, The Persistence, and Farpoint. In the platforming department, we got Moss and Astrobot covering those areas very well. And we have, in terms of racing games, Drive Club VR, Wipeout Omega Collection, and Gran Turismo Sport. In terms of horror games, we have Resident Evil 7, Biohazard, and the upcoming Five Nights at Freddy's VR Help Wanted. Of course, there's some other games in more obscure genres like Job Simulator or the Tetris Effect that offer some great experiences in their own right, but there are also plenty of games that may have initially launched without PSVR support that have since been patched post-launch to support the platform. The biggest game that comes to mind when talking about this is No Man's Sky. Imagine exploring the unlimited universe and possibilities of No Man's Sky in first person and in VR. That's an experience that I'm personally greatly looking forward to. Now bear in mind, all of this is just a drop in the bucket as to what's to come. I can't spend all the time in the world naming off every single list because we'd be here for quite some time. So it seems that Sony is fully supporting the PSVR and it's paying off. They're leading the market with the fastest selling VR headset, and developers from around the world from all walks of life are supporting and tinkering with the platform. But the question still remains that I initially asked: does this make PlayStation VR worth the purchase? In my opinion, yes. Now, I'll be honest, I was very skeptical of PlayStation VR when I first learned about it and when it launched, because Sony has a history of not supporting anything that doesn't immediately take off. And while PlayStation VR is successful, it's certainly not taking the world by storm. But Sony has certainly proved me wrong this time around by supporting and actually advertising the PlayStation VR, despite their history and record to the contrary. This time around, Sony seems to be fully committed to their customers that have bought into their VR ecosystem, and I really hope that it continues to grow. Not because I want it to replace my television set or my couch, but because I want to be able to have that option to experience games at a greater level of immersion than any TV can offer me. Now, despite all of the positives that I have said about PlayStation VR, there are some drawbacks and kinks to work out, as after all, this is first generation technology that we're dealing with here. One of the biggest issues that I've run into, and I'm sure you will as well if you decide to buy into the platform, comes with the fact of these tracking lights that are attached to the headset itself, the Move controllers, the DualShock, and the aim controller. While they work perfectly fine when the PlayStation camera has a direct line of sight, the moment you turn away or step outside of the camera's field of view, the game starts to get jittery, or it'll flat out tell you that you're out of the play area and you need to reposition yourself. While this can be easily fixed by using the in-game HUDs to figure out where you are in relative position to the camera and holding the options button to reset the tracking system, it does interrupt the experience. And when these games get immersive, as many of them do, it's kind of a disappointment to have to see an error screen pop up because either this camera can't see you or the controllers start acting up because the camera can't see where the tracking lights are. I think it's safe to say that in future iterations of PlayStation VR, if this proves successful enough for Sony to make a successor, that Sony will drop these tracking lights in favor of a 6-axis style control system that doesn't rely on a camera to determine where it is in three-dimensional space. But one can only hope. The other most glaringly obvious issue that I'm sure many players will take umbrage with is the fact that this thing has so many cables coming out the back of your PlayStation, to the processing unit, to the TV, and then to the wall outlets. Again, this is first generation technology, and I can only suspect that in future iterations of PlayStation VR headset, we'll start to see a wireless version come along and less cables in general, and hopefully it will turn into a more seamless experience. But the only way we'll know if this will happen for sure is if more people adopt this first gen system and it proves to be worthwhile for Sony to make a successor. The final major area of concern that I'm sure many of you are wondering about is motion sickness. When I first started playing PlayStation VR, the first game that I had played and finished was Doom VFR, and I had played that using all three of the different control options. When I played with the Move controllers, I really didn't get any kind of motion sickness, as moving around using the face buttons was clunky and really didn't feel too vomit-inducing. When I began teleporting with the Move controllers, it got a little interesting, but I wouldn't say I got motion sickness from it. However, when I began using the aim controller, that is when things went downhill quickly. When using Move controllers, I had gotten so used to just teleporting and clunkily moving from place to place that when I began moving fluidly throughout the levels, it certainly took some getting used to. But at the end of the day, motion sickness is something you can conquer with prolonged use of the headset and just taking intermediate breaks whenever you need to. Everyone is different and will adapt to PlayStation VR at their own pace. If you are enjoying yourself, you simply just have to take your time. Besides, it's not worth getting sick over. So, PlayStation VR offers an excellent experience at a very affordable price point, especially when you compare the prices required to get into PC VR gaming. Also, there are plenty of games available from a wide variety of developers that will appeal to many different kinds of players around the world. My only recommendation for you is to look into all the available games for PlayStation VR and see which ones appeal to you as an individual player. That way, if you decide to make the plunge into PlayStation VR, you can, most importantly, have fun playing.